You haven't truly lived until you've tried to zip-tie a 5-pound red duct tape wattle onto the cervical vertebrae of a 12-foot plastic skeleton while a police officer watches you from the warmth of his cruiser, shaking his head in that specific way that suggests he is questioning every life choice that led him to this moment. It was 38 degrees out. My fingers were numb. I was wearing flannel pajama pants tucked into unlaced Timberlands, and I was currently eye level with the second-story bedroom window of my neighbor, Mrs. Janice Higgins. She was there, of course, watching. I could see the blinds twitch. It was a subtle movement, like the gill of a shark sensing blood in the water, but I knew she was there. She was on the phone, probably with the police officer currently sitting in my driveway. "Lind." "Sir," the officer called out. He didn't get out of the car. He just rolled the window down halfway, letting the heat escape. "Sir, can you come down from the ladder?" I looked at the wattle in my hand. It was a masterpiece of amateur crafting. I had used chicken wire for the frame and 3 rolls of industrial-strength tape. It looked like a giant, cancerous tongue. It was perfect. "Just a second, officer," I shouted back, my voice cracking in the cold. "Bonesy needs his wattle. It brings out his eyes." "He doesn't have eyes, sir. He's a skeleton." "It's a metaphor," I yelled, jamming a zip tie through the C3 vertebra and cinching it tight. The plastic clicked loudly in the crisp morning air. Zip, click, the sound of victory. I scrambled down the ladder, tossing the wire cutters onto the frozen grass. Done. I wiped my hands on my flannel pants and walked over to the cruiser. I tried to look like a respectable homeowner and taxpayer, which is hard to do when you look like you just wrestled a craft store and lost. Officer Miller. I read the nameplate. He looked tired. He looked like a man who wanted to be solving murders, or at least writing speeding tickets, but instead was dealing with a suburban dispute over plastic anatomy. "Morning, Officer Miller," I said, leaning casually against the doorframe, trying to stop my teeth from chattering. "Bit brisk for a patrol, huh?" Miller sighed. It was a long, heavy sigh that rattled deep in his chest. "Mr. Dawson, we got a call." "Let me guess," I said, jerking a thumb over my shoulder toward the beige siding of the house next door. "Janice? Said I was creating a public disturbance? Disturbing the peace? Inciting a riot?" "She said you were." Miller looked down at his notepad, squinting. "Desecrating the sanctity of the neighborhood aesthetic with occult imagery disguised as poultry." I snorted. I couldn't help it. Occult poultry. That's a new one. Last week she said he was a beacon for Satan. "Is that a turkey tail?" Miller asked, pointing past me. I turned to look at my creation. Bonesy, the 12-foot skeleton that had retailed for $300 at Home Depot and was currently worth more to me than my 401k, was looming over my front lawn. He was magnificent. I had fashioned a pilgrim hat out of a black trash can and some cardboard, and now, with the red wattle secured, he looked like the ghost of Thanksgiving past coming to collect on unpaid debts. "It is," I said proudly. "Festive, right?" "Mr. Dawson," Miller said, rubbing his temples. "It's November 20th. "Exactly. Thanksgiving is in 2 days. I'm on schedule." "She says it's scaring her cat." "Her cat is an indoor cat, officer. That cat has never felt the touch of grass. The only thing scaring that cat is the reflection of its own misery in the window." Miller cracked a smile. It was faint, but it was there. He looked at Janice's house, then back at Bonesy. "Look, there's no law against bad taste." "Hey!" "But," he continued, "try to keep the noise down while you're decorating. If I have to come back out here, I'm going to have to write a report, and I really don't want to write a report about a giant skeleton turkey." "Understood, officer. I'll be as quiet as a mouse. A dead mouse. A skeleton mouse." Miller rolled up his window without another word and backed out of the driveway. I waved. He didn't wave back. As his taillights faded down the cul-de-sac, I turned toward Janice's window. The blind snapped shut instantly. "Your move, Janice," I whispered to the cold air. "Your move." To understand how we got to the Great Turkey Standoff, You have to go back 3 weeks. You have to understand the glory that was Halloween. I'm not a crazy person. I'm a 32-year-old graphic designer who works from home. I pay my taxes. I mow my lawn on Saturdays. I don't play loud music. But I love Halloween. It's the one time of year you can let your freak flag fly, and nobody judges you. Or so I thought. I bought Bonesy in September. I camped out online, refreshed the page like I was trying to buy Taylor Swift tickets, Tantuan, and secured the asset. When the box arrived, it was the size of a coffin. It took me 3 hours to assemble him. When I finally stood him up, he was majestic. His ribs were the size of ribeye steaks. His skull was the size of a beach ball. He had LCD eyes that blinked. For all of October, I was the king of the block. Kids would stop on their bikes and stare in awe. Parents would pull their minivans over to take selfies. I felt like a local celebrity. I added a fog machine. I added purple uplighting. It was the centerpiece of the neighborhood. Then came November 1st, the universal day of the walk of shame for holiday decor. The day the pumpkins start to rot and the cobwebs look less spooky and more trashy. I woke up that morning fully intending to take Bonesy down. I had the box ready in the garage. I had my socket wrench set. Nayar. I was a responsible citizen prepared to return my lawn to its pristine, boring state of fescue and mulch. I walked out the front door, coffee in hand, ready to disassemble my plastic friend. And that's when I saw it. A white envelope taped directly to the center of my front door with blue painter's tape. It wasn't a friendly note. Friendly notes are tucked in the mailbox or wedged in the handle. Taping it to the door is an act of aggression. It's a summons. I pulled it off. The paper was thick. Resume paper. Dear resident, while we all appreciate holiday spirit, I feel compelled to inform you that your display this year has crossed a line. It is excessive, grotesque, and frankly disturbing. Several neighbors, I knew several neighbors meant just her, have expressed concern about the psychological impact such a monstrosity has on the local wildlife, not to mention the property values of our quiet community. The eyes are particularly demonic. Now that Halloween is over, I expect this eyesore to be removed immediately, by noon today. If not, I will be forced to contact the Homeowners Association regarding violations of the community aesthetic guidelines. Let's keep our neighborhood classy. Sincerely, a concerned neighbor. I stared at the letter. I read it twice. Classy, I said aloud. I looked over at Janice's yard. It was pristine, manicured, soulless. She had a single garden gnome near her porch. It was smiling. I hated that gnome. I looked up at Bonesy. He stared back with his dead plastic eyes. He didn't look demonic. He looked misunderstood. He looked like he just wanted to belong. If she had come over and asked nicely, if she had said, "Hey Dave, the skeleton is freaking out my grandkids," I probably would have taken it down. I'm a reasonable guy. I can be reasoned with. But she didn't. She left a note, on resume paper, with a deadline. Noon. I checked my watch. It was 9 a.m. I felt a spark in my chest. A warm, dangerous little ember of spite. I walked back inside, leaving Bonesy standing tall, and went straight to my filing cabinet. I pulled out the massive binder that they give you when you buy a house in this subdivision. The HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The CC and Rs. The Bible of the suburbs. I poured a fresh cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen island, flipping pages. Section 4.2, Lawn Maintenance. Grass height, weed control. I was good there. Section 5.1, Exterior paint colors. Beige, greige, taupe. Thrilling stuff. Section 7.3, Outbuildings and sheds. Section 8.0, Holiday decorations. Here we go. I ran my finger down the fine print. Residents are permitted to display festive decorations appropriate for current holidays. Decorations must be installed no earlier than 30 days prior to the holiday and removed no later than 14 days after the holiday. I read it again. Appropriate for current holidays. It did not define decorations. It did not specify materials. It did not say no 12-foot skeletons. It just said they had to be for the current holiday. I looked at the calendar. November 1st. Thanksgiving. November 24th. Technically, we were within the window. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who was about to spend a stupid amount of money to prove a point. I walked outside. Janice was in her yard now, sweeping invisible dust off her driveway. She saw me. She stopped sweeping. She adjusted her cardigan, gripping the broom handle like a weapon. I walked right up to the property line. The invisible, demilitarized zone. "Morning, Janice," I said cheerfully. "Dave." She nodded. Her lips pursed so tight they practically disappeared. "Did you get my note?" "I did. Thank you so much for reaching out. Communication is key in a community, right?" She blinked, clearly expecting a fight or an apology. She got neither. "So, you're taking it down? It's past noon nearly." "Well, actually, Janice, I was just reading the HOA bylaws. Fascinating read. Did you know we're allowed to have decorations up for upcoming holidays starting 30 days prior?" Her eyes narrowed. "Halloween is over, Dave." "I know, it's sad, isn't it? But you know what's not over? The spirit of gratitude. Thanksgiving is right around the corner." "What are you talking about?" "I realized you were right," I said, stepping back and gesturing grandly to Bonesy. "He was too scary. Too occult. He needs a rebrand. He needs to embrace the harvest." "Dave," she warned, her voice dropping an octave, "do not do this." "Do what? Celebrate our pilgrim forefathers? Janice, are you against American history?" "It is a skeleton," she hissed. "It is a symbol of death. Actually, beneath all our skin, we're all skeletons, Janice. He's just exposed. He's vulnerable, and frankly, I think he looks hungry." I turned on my heel and walked toward my garage. "Have a great day, Janice. I have some crafting to do." I could feel her gaze burning 2 holes into the back of my flannel shirt. I didn't care. I had work to do. The first step was structural integrity. If I was going to go to war, I needed to fortify my position. I called Big Tony. Big Tony isn't a mobster, but he looks like one. He's a general contractor who did my patio last year. He has hands the size of honey hams and drives a truck that sounds like it's gargling gravel. He arrived at 2 p.m. He walked onto the lawn, looked at Bonesy, looked at me, and then spat on the ground. "You want me to do what?" Tony asked. "I need him anchored," I explained. "The wind picks up in November. Plus, I have reason to believe there might be tamper attempts. I need you to pour concrete footings, locking brackets, the works." Tony squinted at the skeleton's plastic feet. "It's a toy, Dave. It's made of high-density polyethylene. You want me to pour concrete for a toy?" "I want you to pour concrete for a symbol of freedom, Tony. Can you do it or not?" Tony scratched his chin. "I mean, yeah, I can do it. I got some quick set in the truck. I can dig 2 post holes, sink some rebar, bolt the base plates down. He won't move unless a tornado hits him, but it's gonna cost you. Weekend rates." "Do it." "Why?" Tony asked, genuinely curious. "Why are you doing this? The lady next door?" He nodded toward Janice's house. Janice was currently peering through her blinds with binoculars. Actual binoculars. "She called him an eyesore, Tony. She left a note." Tony looked at Janice's house, then back at me. A slow grin spread across his face. "My ex-wife was like that. Hated my boat. Said it was trashy to keep it in the driveway." "What did you do?" "I bought a bigger boat." Tony clapped me on the shoulder, nearly dislocating it. "I'll get the shovel. We're burying this sucker deep." By sunset, Bonesy was immovable. Tony had sunk 18 inches of concrete into the earth. He bolted the metal base frame into the wet cement and then, for good measure, used industrial adhesive to fuse the plastic leg joints. "That skeleton is now a permanent structure," Tony said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You'd need a bulldozer to get him out." "Perfect." I paid Tony in cash and a 6-pack of beer. He drove off, honking his horn. That night I went to work. I didn't have a giant pilgrim costume lying around, so I had to improvise. I went to the fabric store. Do you know how intimidating a fabric store is for a single man in his 30s? It's a labyrinth of floral prints and judgment. I bought 10 yards of black felt, 5 yards of white cotton, a hot glue gun. I spent the next 6 hours in my garage, manic. I was like Dr. Frankenstein, but instead of creating life, I was creating a size XXXL tunic. I cut, I glued, I cursed. I burned my thumb. I drank 3 energy drinks. By 3 a.m., the suit was done. It was crude, sure. The seams were jagged, and the collar was lopsided. But from the street, it would read. I dragged the ladder out. The neighborhood was silent. The streetlights buzzed overhead. I felt like a ninja. A ninja carrying a giant felt onesie. Getting the tunic on Bonesy was a physics puzzle. I had to disconnect his arms, thank God for detachable joints, and slide the fabric over his ribcage. I reattached the arms. I slapped the hat, a modified trash can, onto his skull. Then, the pièce de résistance, the cornucopia. I had bought a wicker laundry basket and spray-painted it brown. I filled it with plastic pumpkins, gourds, and oversized fake grapes I found in the clearance bin at a home decor store. I wired it to Bonesy's right hand. I stepped back. He looked ridiculous. He looked like a Puritan who had starved to death but refused to leave the party. I went to bed, exhausted but happy. The next morning, the letter from the HOA arrived via email. Janice moved fast. Subject, notice of violation. 422 Maple Drive. Dear Mr. Dawson, it has been brought to our attention that you have failed to remove your Halloween decorations in a timely manner, per Section 8.0. I hit reply immediately. Dear Board, please see attached photo. The decoration in question has been updated to reflect the upcoming federal holiday, Thanksgiving. Per Section 8.0, residents are permitted to display festive decor 30 days prior. Please advise if Pilgrim Bonesy violates any specific height or material restrictions not listed in the handbook. Happy Thanksgiving. Sincerely, Dave. I attached a picture I had just taken. The sun was rising behind Bonesy, casting a long, skeletal shadow across Janice's pristine lawn. I waited. 10 minutes later, I saw Janice storm out of her house. She was wearing a bathrobe and slippers. She marched to the property line. I walked out to meet her, coffee in hand. This is childish, Dave, she shrieked. It was the first time she had raised her voice. It's a mockery. It's festive, Janice. Look at the cornucopia. He's bountiful. He's a corpse, a giant looming corpse. He's a pilgrim, Janice. Many of them died during the first winter. It's historically accurate. I'm raising awareness. I'm calling the cops, she threatened, pointing a shaking finger at me. I'm telling them you're harassing me. Harassing you? By decorating my own lawn? You're doing this to spite me! I'm doing this because I have holiday spirit, Janice. Why do you hate America? She made a sound like a tea kettle boiling over, spun around, and marched back into her house. 20 minutes later, Officer Miller showed up. And that brings us back to the turkey waddle. Standing there in the cold, watching Miller drive away, I realized something. This wasn't just about a skeleton anymore. This was about control. Janice wanted to control the world. She wanted everything in its box. She wanted the suburbs to be a beige, silent vacuum where nothing unexpected ever happened. Bonesy was chaos. Bonesy was the unexpected. And I was his prophet. I went inside and warmed up my hands. I looked at the calendar. Thanksgiving was in 2 days. But after that, Christmas. I smiled wicked. Christmas was the big one, the Super Bowl of decorating. If she thought Pilgrim Bonesy was bad, she wasn't ready for what was coming. I needed lights. I needed sound. I needed a Santa suit that would terrify children and delight drunks. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for the electrician I had used for my kitchen remodel. Hey, Steve, it's Dave. Yeah, good. Listen, a weird question. How hard is it to wire a spotlight into the chest cavity of a 12-foot plastic skeleton? Uh-huh. And can we make it pulsate? Great. When can you come over? The war had begun, and I had a feeling it was going to be a long, cold winter. Thanksgiving morning broke cold and gray, the kind of sky that threatens snow but only delivers a wet, miserable drizzle. For most people, this is a day of cooking, football, and navigating the political minefield of extended family. For me, it was showtime. I woke up at 6 a.m., fueled by spite and premium roast coffee. I stood at my front window, looking out at the battlefield. Bonesy was holding his ground. The red duct tape wattle was glistening with morning dew, flapping wetly against his cervical spine in the breeze. The hat, my modified trash can, had listed slightly to the left, an icon, giving him a rakish, drunk uncle at the reception vibe. He was beautiful. The first wave of engagement happened at 8 a.m. Our neighborhood, Oak Creek Estates, there is no creek, and the oaks are mostly invasive maples, plays host to the annual Gizzard Gallop, a 5K charity run that funnels hundreds of panting, spandex-clad suburbanites right past my driveway. Usually, I sleep through it. This year, I was on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, holding a mug of cocoa, waiting for the audience. The lead runner, a guy who looked like he had 0% body fat and hated joy, rounded the corner. He had his head down, checking his Garmin. He looked up. He saw the 12-foot skeleton pilgrim holding a laundry basket of plastic gourds. He faltered. Just a step, a glitch in the matrix. He did a double take, nearly tripping over the curb. "Happy Thanksgiving!" I shouted from the porch, raising my mug. "What the hell is that?" he wheezed, not breaking stride, but craning his neck. "It's history," I yelled back. Then the pack arrived. The casual runners, the moms with strollers, the guys wearing turkey hats. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. People slowed down. Phones came out. A bottleneck formed at the end of my driveway. "Oh my God, look at the waddle!" someone screamed. "Is that a skeleton? Take a picture. Get me with the skeleton." I watched with the benevolent pride of a creator. Janice's blinds were closed tight, but I knew she could hear it. You can't ignore the sound of 50 people laughing and shouting, "Selfie!" 20 feet from your master bedroom. Then the police cruiser rolled by again. Not Miller this time. A different officer. He slowed down. "A trust-you were." Saw the crowd, saw the skeleton, saw me waving, and just kept driving. He didn't want the paperwork. Smart man. By noon, the runners were gone, and the real game began. The arrival of the in-laws. Janice hosts Thanksgiving. I know this because for the last 3 years, I've had to listen to her scream at her husband, Bob, about the placement of the placemats. Bob is a good guy. He drives a Camry. He looks like he's been slowly eroding for 2 decades, like a cliff face battered by the sea. I saw the cars pulling up, Audis, Lexuses, an immaculate Buick. Janice's family has money, or at least they act like they do. They stepped out of their cars carrying covered dishes and bottles of wine, dressed in varying shades of beige and navy. I waited until they were all on the porch, ringing the doorbell. "Alexa," I whispered to the dot I had rigged up on the porch, connected to a Bluetooth speaker hidden behind Bonesy's left tibia. "Play Turkey in the Straw, Volume 10. The fiddle music blasted across the lawn. It was deafening. It was aggressive. It was the sound of a barn dance from hell. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do! Janice's guests jumped. An elderly woman in a fur coat clutched her pearls, literally clutched them, and stared in horror at the giant skeleton looming over the hedge. Janice threw the door open. She wasn't looking at her family. She was looking at me. "Turn it off," she mouthed, her face a mask of pure fury. I smiled and tapped my ear, pretending I couldn't hear her over the jaunty fiddle music. I gave a thumbs up. She ushered her family inside and slammed the door. I let the song play for another 30 seconds, just enough to ensure it was stuck in their heads for the appetizer course, and then cut the feed. "Happy Thanksgiving, Bonesy," I said, patting his plastic shin. "We're doing the Lord's work." The high of Thanksgiving sustained me for about 24 hours, but as the tryptophan wore off and Black Friday rolled in, I faced a new logistical nightmare. I had to change the costume. It was raining, a cold, biting rain that turned the world into mud. I stood in the garage, looking at the heap of red fabric and white fur I had purchased the day before. "Santa Claus," I muttered. "God help me." I went outside. The concrete Tony had poured was fully cured. Bonesy was now as much a part of the property as the driveway. This was good for stability, but bad for dressing. I couldn't tilt him. I couldn't lay him down. I had to dress a 12-foot vertical object while standing on a ladder in the rain. I started by cutting the zip ties on the pilgrim hat. The wind caught the trash can lid and it frisbeed across the yard, landing directly in Janice's birdbath. "Strike one," I muttered. I retrieved the lid. Janice was fortunately at the mall, likely returning gifts she hated, and climbed back up. Taking the tunic off was harder than putting it on. The felt had soaked up the rain and weighed about 40 pounds. It was like wrestling a wet bear. I was halfway down the ladder, tugging on the hem, when my foot slipped. I didn't fall. I wish I had fallen. It would have been more dignified. Instead, I slid 3 rungs, flailing, and instinctively grabbed the only thing within reach, Bonesy's pelvis. The plastic was slippery. My hand slid off, but my watch band, a cheap metal link strap, caught on the jagged edge of the pelvic bone. I was left dangling, 1 foot on the ladder, 1 foot in the air, suspended by my wrist from the crotch of a giant skeleton. "Help," I whispered. I swung there for a moment, contemplating the headlines. "Local man dies in erotic asphyxiation. Accident with lawn ornament." I managed to unhook myself, scraping my forearm raw, and collapsed onto the muddy grass. I lay there for a long time, staring up at the gray sky, rain pattering on my face. Bonesy looked down at me, naked now except for his concrete shoes. He looked judgmental. "You think this is funny?" I asked him. "I'm doing this for you." I got up. I was wet, I was bleeding, I was cold, but I had a mission. At 2 p.m., Steve the electrician arrived. Steve is the opposite of Big Tony. Tony is chaos. Steve is precision. Steve wears a tool belt where every screwdriver is color-coded. He drives a van that smells like ozone and new carpet. He walked up the driveway, holding a clipboard. He looked at me, mud-stained, bleeding, holding a bundle of red velvet. And then he looked at the skeleton. "So," Steve said, clicking his pen, "this is the patient." "This is the patient," I agreed. "You mentioned internal illumination and a spotlight." "I want him to glow, Steve. I want him to be visible from space. I want the International Space Station to use him as a navigational beacon." Steve nodded, taking notes. "And the power source?" "I have an outdoor GFCI outlet on the porch, but I'm worried about the load. I'm planning on running about 3,000 LEDs, plus the spotlight, plus a sound system." Steve walked around Bonesy, tapping the plastic ribs with a voltmeter probe, which was unnecessary but looked professional. "We can do it, but we need to drill into the chassis. We need to run the conduit up the spine. It's going to be invasive." "Do what you have to do." "It's not going to be cheap, Dave. Hazardous working conditions. Height pay, plus..." He gestured to Janice's house. "Hazard pay for the neighbor." "She's at the mall." "Good, let's work fast." For the next 4 hours, my front lawn became a surgery center. Steve drilled holes in Bonesy's vertebrae. We fished 50 feet of extension cord up through the hollow legs. We zip-tied LED strips, the expensive kind that change color with an app, inside the rib cage and the skull. The sun went down. The rain stopped. The air got crisp. "Ready for the test fire?" Steve asked, standing by the outlet. I stood in the street. "Hit it." Steve flipped the switch. Wham! It was glorious. Bonesy didn't just light up, he radiated. The LEDs inside the ribs were set to a slow, pulsing red, like a beating heart. The skull was a piercing white. The spotlight at the base cast a shadow across Janice's house that stretched all the way to her second-story gutter. It's blinding," I said, shielding my eyes. "It's 4,000 lumens," Steve said, looking at his work with satisfaction. "I bypassed the dimmer. It's full power or nothing." "Perfect." Steve packed up his tools. "You know this is insane, right?" "Is it?" I asked, watching the red light pulse against the siding of my house. "Or is it art?" "It's insane," Steve confirmed. "That'll be $600. The weekend passed in a blur of sewing and rigging. By Sunday night, December 1st, Santa Claus was ready. I had draped the red velvet suit over him. It was trimmed with white faux fur that looked like it had been skinned from a polar bear. I gave him a beard made of cotton batting that hung down to his sternum. But the pièce de résistance was the bag. I had filled a black Tian contractor bag with pillows to give it bulk, but I let a few shapes poke out. A doll's leg here, a toy truck there, It was slung over his shoulder. I waited for darkness. Janice's car was in the driveway. Her lights were on. She was home. I went to my phone. I opened the lighting app. I opened the sound app. I stood on the porch. Showtime? I hit on. The light blasted on. The red heartbeat throbbed. Then the sound. I had downloaded a sound bite. It wasn't jingle bells. It was a deep, slowed-down voice, actually me, pitched down 2 octaves, saying, "Ho, ho, ho." The bass rattled my own windows. I waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The light in Janice's living room flicked off. Then the porch light flicked on. The front door opened. Janice stepped out. She was wearing a puffy coat. She walked to the edge of her porch, stared at the glowing, pulsating, baritone-voiced skeleton Santa for a full 10 seconds. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She just took her phone out of her pocket, dialed a number, and held it to her ear, staring directly at me. I waved. She turned around and went back inside. 10 minutes later, the blue lights reflected off the wet pavement. It was Miller again, my favorite. I met him at the end of the driveway before he even got out of the car. I had a thermos of coffee ready. 2 cups. "Evening, officer," I said. Miller rolled down the window. He looked at the skeleton. He looked at the red, pulsing light. He listened to the HO, 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 that was currently vibrating the side mirror of his cruiser. "Dave," Miller said. "Officer?" "Turn the sound down." "Is it too loud? I checked the decibel ordinance. It's under 85 decibels before 10 p.m. It's currently 7:15. Miller rubbed his eyes. "Dave, Mrs. Higgins called dispatch and said, and I quote, 'The skeleton is threatening me.'" "Threatening her? He's Santa. He's bringing joy. She says the bag looks like a body bag." I looked back at the bag. "It's a sack of toys, Miller. Look, there's a truck. There's a doll leg." "The doll leg looks like a human leg from here, Dave." "It's perspective. It's art." Miller sighed. He opened the door and stepped out. He was a big guy, but next to Bonesy, he looked like a child. He walked up to the skeleton. He poked the cotton beard. He looked at the concrete footing. "You cemented it?" "Safety first." Miller shook his head. He looked over at Janice's house. She was in the window again. "Okay," Miller said. "Here's the deal. You turn the volume down by 50%. You angle the spotlight down so it's not hitting her bedroom window. And maybe push the doll leg back into the bag." "That's censorship, Miller. That's me not writing you a citation for disturbing the peace. Take the win, Dave." I sighed. "Fine. 50% volume. Spotlight adjustment. The doll leg retracted." "Good man." Miller started walking back to his car, then stopped. He pulled out his personal phone. "Hey, stand next to it?" "Really?" "My kid loves this stuff. He didn't believe me about the turkey." I grinned and stood next to Santa Claus, giving a thumbs up. Miller snapped a photo. "Merry Christmas, Dave." "Merry Christmas, officer." As he drove away, I looked at Janice's window. She was still there. I could see the silhouette. I adjusted the volume on my phone. Down. I adjusted the spotlight. Down. Then, I went to the color settings on the LEDs. I changed the eye color from white to a deep, piercing green. The color of money. The color of envy. The color of the Grinch. "Your move, Janice," I whispered. But as I walked back inside, the adrenaline started to fade, replaced by a creeping realization. It was December 1st. I had to keep this up for 25 days. And then, January. What the hell happens in January? I sat on my couch, staring at the ceiling. The red light from outside pulsed through my curtains. Thump, 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 January. The bleak midwinter. The month where joy goes to die. I needed a plan. I needed a theme. I pulled up my laptop and typed into Google, "What holidays are in January?" Results: New Year's Day, Martin Luther King Jr. Day, National Bird Day, National Spaghetti Day. I stared at the screen. "National Spaghetti Day," I said aloud. I looked at the kitchen. I had a lot of extension cords. I had a lot of PVC pipe. I could make a fork, a giant fork, and the skeleton could be twirling it. No, too abstract. I scrolled down. January 19th, National Popcorn Day. No. Then I saw it. The perfect, petty, beautiful solution for the post-holiday slump. February 2nd, Groundhog Day. But before that, the long, cold dark of January needed something to bridge the gap. Something sporty, something cold. The Winter Olympics. Bonesy needed skis. I closed the laptop. The war was far from over. It was just entering the endurance phase. Janice thought she could wait me out? She thought the cold would break me? She didn't know I had thermal underwear. She didn't know I had Amazon Prime. I went to the window one last time. The green eyes of Santa Claus stared out into the suburban night, a silent sentinel of chaos. We're going to need more plywood, I told him. By the time the last of the Christmas lights came down in the neighborhood, I was exhausted. Not physically. My core strength had actually improved from hauling plywood. But spiritually. Maintaining a level of high-octane pettiness requires a caloric intake I wasn't prepared for. January hit the suburbs like a wet towel. Everything was gray. The festive cheer evaporated, replaced by the grim reality of credit card bills and seasonal depression. The street was quiet. Except for my lawn. Janice had taken down her wreath on December 26th at 8 a.m. sharp. She had scrubbed her porch. She was ready for the sterility of the new year. I, however, was ready for the winter games. "You're building what?" Big Tony asked. He was back. I had him on speed dial now. "A luge," I said. "Or maybe a ski jump, I haven't decided." We were standing in the driveway. Bonesy was currently naked again, stripping off his Santa suit. The red velvet was stained with mildew. Oh, and the cotton beard had become a nesting ground for what I suspected were voles. "It's January, Dave," Tony said, shivering. He was wearing a Carhartt jacket that had seen better decades. "The ground is frozen solid. I can't dig." "I don't need digging. I need elevation. I need you to build a ramp off the roof of the porch." Tony looked at the porch. He looked at the skeleton. "You want the skeleton to look like he's skiing off your roof?" "Exactly. Dynamic motion, Tony. Action." "And the liability insurance on this?" "I have a robust umbrella policy." Tony sighed, the sigh of a man who is only doing this because his daughter's tuition is due. "I'll get the lumber." The construction took 3 days. It was loud. I made sure of that. Circular saws at 8 a.m. Hammer drills at noon. Janice came out once. She didn't say anything. She just stood on her porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring. She looked tired. We all looked tired. When it was finished, it was a masterpiece of structural engineering and questionable taste. We had built a wooden ramp extending from my porch roof down to the lawn, ending right at Bonesy's concrete feet. I had bought a pair of vintage wooden skis from a thrift store, 7 feet long, and bolted them to Bonesy's feet. I posed him in a crouch, poles tucked under his arms, knees bent, thanks to the heat gun I used to soften the plastic joints. He looked like he was about to launch himself into traffic. I added a helmet. I added a bib that said USA. "Gold medal," I whispered. The reaction was slower this time. The novelty was wearing off for the neighbors. They drove by, saw the skiing skeleton, shook their heads, and kept driving. But not Janice. Janice had changed tactics. She stopped confronting me. She stopped leaving notes. She went silent. And that scared me more than the yelling. February rolled in. The snow came. Real snow. 6 inches of heavy, wet slush. The skiing motif was perfect. Bonesy looked native to the environment. But I was bored. The thrill of the ski jump had faded. I needed romance. I needed passion. I needed Cupid. Valentine's Day was approaching. "I need a diaper," I told the cashier at the fabric store. She was an older woman named Margaret. She knew me by now. She didn't even blink. "For the skeleton?" "For the skeleton." "Size?" "Imagine a minivan made of bone." She cut me 5 yards of white fleece. "You going to make a bow and arrow too?" "Margaret, you know me so well." Making a giant diaper is harder than it sounds. It requires pleating. It requires safety pins the size of railway spikes. But I managed it. On February 10th, I unveiled Cupid Bonesy. He was wearing the diaper. He had giant cardboard wings spray-painted gold. He was holding a PVC bow with an arrow pointed directly, and I mean directly, at Janice's front door. I thought it was subtle. A message of love. I'm aiming for your heart, Janice. 2 days later, the sabotage happened. I woke up on a Saturday morning to a strange sound. A thwack, thwack, thwack. I went to the window. Bonesy was white. Not bone white. Toilet paper white. Someone had TP'd the skeleton. Streamers of cheap single-ply tissue were draped over his ribs, his skull, his golden wings. It was a mess. I ran outside, barefoot in the snow. "Who did this?" I yelled to the empty street. "Who desecrates the god of love?" I looked at Janice's house. Dark, quiet. I went back inside and pulled up the Ring camera footage. I scrubbed back to 2 a.m. There, a figure, short, stocky, wearing a balaclava that looked suspiciously like a ski mask from the 80s. The figure was moving stiffly, like their joints hurt. They were throwing rolls of TP with the arm strength of a toddler. It wasn't kids. It wasn't teenagers. I zoomed in. The figure paused to adjust their pants. They were wearing plaid slippers. I knew those slippers. I had seen them retrieving the mail. Bob, Janice's husband. I watched the footage again. Bob threw a roll. It missed entirely and landed in my bushes. He threw another. It caught on Bonesy's clavicle. Bob did a little fist pump, a sad, low-energy fist pump, and then shuffled back toward his house. I sat back in my chair. They were fighting back. Guerrilla warfare. I felt a surge of respect. Finally, a worthy opponent. I didn't clean it up. I left the toilet paper. I went out and spray-painted the soggy tissue pink. "Now it's texture," I said. "Now it's art." March arrived. The thaw. The mud returned. St. Patrick's Day. I made a mistake in March. A tactical error driven by hubris. I wanted Bonesy to be green. I didn't want to sew a suit. I was lazy. So I bought 5 cans of temporary spray hair color, the kind kids use for Spirit Week. I sprayed him, head to toe. He looked vibrant. He looked like a radioactive disaster. I gave him a top hat and a Kiss Me I'm Dead sash. Then it rained. It rained for 3 days straight. The temporary dye washed off the plastic. But it didn't wash away. It washed down. It pooled at the base. It stained the concrete footing. It ran in emerald rivulets down my driveway, across the sidewalk, and, due to the slope of the street, right into the gutter in front of Janice's house. I came home from work to find Janice standing in the street, pointing at the neon green sludge that had accumulated in front of her mailbox. "It's toxic waste!" she screamed. "You're poisoning the water table." "It's hair dye, Janice. It's biodegradable. It looks like Shrek exploded in your yard." "That's a very vivid image, Janice. Are you a writer?" She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the EPA. I'm calling the city. This is an environmental hazard." "Go ahead, call Captain Planet, see if I care." But I did care. Because the green wasn't coming off Bonesy. It had stained the porous plastic. He wasn't white anymore. He was a sickly, minty green. He looked nauseous. I had to pivot. I bought a pressure washer. For the next 2 days, I blasted Bonesy with 3,000 psi of water. It sounded like a jet engine. I wore goggles. I blasted the green off his ribs. I blasted the green off his face. The noise was incredible. The water spray drifted over the property line. Janice's windows were wet. She called the cops again. Officer Miller arrived. He didn't even get out of the car this time. He just rolled down the window and beckoned me over. I turned off the pressure washer. My ears were ringing. "Dave," Miller said. "Miller, what are we doing?" "We are cleansing, Miller. We are purifying." "You're spraying water on Mrs. Higgins' Lexus." "It's mist, Miller. It's a free car wash." "She says you're aiming at her." "I'm aiming at the sin, Miller. The sin of the green dye." Miller rubbed his face. He looked exhausted. "Look, the HOA meeting is next week, April 1st. I froze. "April 1st? "Yeah, the quarterly meeting. I saw the flyer at the community center. Your name is on the agenda, Dave." My stomach dropped. "My name?" Agenda Item 4, the skeleton issue. I looked at Miller. "They're going to try to ban him." "They're going to try to ban you, Dave. You gotta get it together. If they vote to fine you, It's retroactive. That's like $50 a day for 5 months. I did the math. Thousands of dollars. Thanks for the tip, Miller. I didn't tell you nothing. I just came to tell you to watch the spray. He drove off. I stood there, water dripping from the pressure washer nozzle. April 1st, April Fool's Day. The irony was palpable. I looked at Bonesy. He was mostly white again, but his joints were still stained green. He looked battle-hardened. They want a war? I said to him. They want to legislate you out of existence? I dropped the wand. Fine, let's give them a show. I spent the next week preparing for the meeting. I treated it like a legal defense. I printed out the bylaws. I highlighted passages. I made charts. But I also needed a distraction. I needed to keep the pressure on. Easter was coming. Easter is a soft holiday. Pastels, bunnies, eggs. I decided to go hard. I built giant bunny ears, 6 feet tall, pink and white fur. I wired them to Bonesy's skull. I bought a basket the size of a hot tub. I filled it with those giant plastic eggs they sell for lawn decor. But the kicker was the face. I painted whiskers on Bonesy's skull with black electrical tape. I gave him buck teeth made of white cardboard. He looked terrifying. He looked like the bunny from Donnie Darko's steroid-abusing cousin. On the morning of the meeting, I added the final touch. I hid Bluetooth speakers in the bushes. I set them to play a loop. Not music, just ambient nature sounds. Birds chirping, but amplified. Loud. Tweet, tweet, chirp. It was psychological warfare. It was designed to be annoying but uncomplainable. What, Janice? You hate birds? You hate the sound of nature? I put on my best suit, the one I wear to weddings and funerals. I grabbed my binder. Let's go, I said to the empty house. I walked to the community center. It was 3 blocks away. I saw neighbors walking too. They were whispering. They were looking at me. I felt like a gladiator entering the Coliseum. I walked into the meeting room. It was packed. Folding chairs were set up in rows. There were cookies on a side table. Janice was sitting in the front row. She was wearing a red blazer, power color. She had a binder, too. She turned and saw me. She didn't smile. She just tapped her pen on her binder. I took a seat in the back. The HOA president, a man named Gary who took his unpaid volunteer position more seriously than his actual job, tapped the microphone. All right, let's come to order. They went through the minutes, the budget, the issue with the pool filter. I waited. My leg bounced. Okay, Gary said, clearing his throat. Moving on to new business. Item 4, the decoration situation on Maple Drive. The room went silent. Every head turned to look at me. Janice stood up. Mr. President, she began, her voice trembling with righteous indignation. For 5 months we have been held hostage. She opened her binder. She had photos, printed 8x10 glossies. Exhibit A, the turkey. Exhibit B, the Santa with the body bag. Exhibit C, the radioactive green monstrosity. She held them up. The crowd murmured. Some people laughed. Some gasped. This is not just a decoration, Janice continued. This is a permanent structure. It is an eyesore. It is driving down our property values. I have not been able to open my blinds since November. She pointed a finger at me. He is mocking us. He is mocking this community. She sat down. There was a smattering of applause from her clique in the front row. Gary looked at me. Mr. Dawson, you have the floor. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I walked to the front of the room. I didn't use the microphone. I projected. Neighbors, I said. Janice calls him a monstrosity. I call him community. I opened my binder. I have here, I said, holding up a stack of papers, prints of over 300 Instagram posts tagged with #Bonesy the Burb King. I flipped through them. Here is the Miller family taking a Christmas card photo. Here are the local runners giving him a high five. Here is a delivery driver taking a selfie. I looked at Janice. You say he drives down property values? I checked Zillow. The average estimate in our neighborhood has gone up 3% since November. Why? Because we have character. We have flavor. It's a skeleton, Janice shouted. It is art, I countered. And according to Article 9, Section 2 of our very own bylaws, statuary and artistic installations are permitted provided they are anchored and maintained. I paused for effect. Bonesy is anchored. He is set in 18 inches of concrete. He is maintained. I wash him. I dress him. He is not a decoration, Gary. He is a statue. He is a permanent installation of modern art. The room erupted. "He's got a point," someone shouted from the back. "It is kind of funny," someone else said. "I hate looking at it," an old man yelled. Gary banged his gavel. "Order! Order!" He looked at the board members. They whispered. They checked the bylaws. "Technically," Gary said, looking pained, "if it's concrete, and if he calls it art..." Janice stood up again. "You cannot be serious. It's a plastic skeleton wearing bunny ears." "That," I said, "is a commentary on the commercialization of Easter. It's satire, Janice." Gary sighed. "We're going to have to vote. All in favor of allowing the statue to remain?" Hands went up. I counted. It was close. The parents with young kids were with me. The retirees were with Janice. All opposed? Hands went up. Gary counted. He counted again. "It's a tie," he said. 22 to 22. The room buzzed. "In the event of a tie," Gary said, "the president casts the deciding vote." Gary looked at Janice. He looked at me. He looked down at his notes. I kind of like the Santa one," Gary admitted quietly. Janice gasped. "The motion to remove fails," Gary said. "The skeleton stays." I didn't cheer. I didn't gloat. I just nodded, closed my binder, and walked out. But inside? Inside, I was doing a backflip. I walked home in the dark. The streetlights hummed. I got to my house. Bonesy was there, looming in the shadows, his bunny ears silhouetted against the moon. "We won," I told him. "You're legal." I looked at Janice's house. Her car pulled into the driveway. She got out. She didn't look at me. She walked straight to her front door. But then, she stopped. She turned. She looked at Bonesy. And for the first time in 5 months, she didn't look angry. She just looked defeated. And suddenly, I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a guy who had spent 5 months torturing an old lady with a plastic prop. The pettiness had drained out of me. "Hey, Janice," I called out. She froze. She didn't turn around. "Happy Easter," I said softly. She stood there for a moment. Then she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, and went inside. I looked up at Bonesy. "Maybe we tone it down for May," I said. "Maybe just flowers. Lots of flowers." Winning isn't everything. In fact, in the suburbs, so winning is just the prelude to a different kind of suffering. The silent treatment. You might think that after the great HOA showdown of April 1st, where Gary the president cast the tie-breaking vote to save Bonesy from the landfill, I would be taking a victory lap. You'd imagine me popping champagne on the lawn, draped in the American flag, while "We Are the Champions" blasted from the Bluetooth speakers hidden in the rhododendrons. But I didn't, because Janice stopped playing. For the entire month of April, she didn't look at me. She didn't look at Bonesy. She didn't leave notes. She didn't call the police. She just existed. She drove her spotless Lexus in and out of her driveway with the grim determination of a hearse driver. She watered her hydrangeas with her back turned to the property line. It was unnerving. It was like playing tennis against a wall that had suddenly decided to stop bouncing the ball back. Bonesy stood there, still wearing his Easter ears, which were now matted and gray from the spring rain, looking like a washed-up mascot for a defunct theme park. The thrill was gone. The adrenaline of the fight had evaporated, leaving behind only the awkward reality that I was a 32-year-old man with a 12-foot plastic rabbit in his yard. "She's plotting something," I told Big Tony. Tony was back because the concrete base had settled slightly, causing Bonesy to lean about 3 degrees to the left. It wasn't dangerous, but it made him look inquisitive, like he was constantly leaning in to hear a secret. "She's not plotting," Tony grunted, jamming a shim under the base plate. "She's defeated. You broke her spirit, Dave. You crushed the rebellion." "I don't like it. It's too quiet." "Take the win," Tony said, standing up and wiping grease on his jeans. "And take those ears down. It's almost May. He looks ridiculous." "He always looks ridiculous, Tony. That's the point." No, he looks like a furry that got left out in the rain. Fix it. Tony was right. It was time for a seasonal refresh. The transition from Easter to the patriotic fervor of summer required a bridge, a palate cleanser. Cinco de Mayo. I hesitated. Cultural appropriation is a minefield, and I didn't want to get canceled by the neighborhood Facebook group. But then I remembered that Janice's favorite restaurant was Don Pablo's at the mall, where she undoubtedly ordered the fajitas and complained about the spice level. I decided to go respectful but loud. I bought a sombrero. Not a cheap party store sombrero, but a genuine 3-foot-wide straw sombrero from a specialty importer online. It smelled like hay and authenticity. I bought a serape blanket. On May 5th, Bonesy was transformed. I ditched the maracas idea, too cliché, and instead gave him an acoustic guitar. A real one. I found a cracked Fender acoustic at a pawn shop for $40. I wired it to his hands with fishing line, so it looked like he was strumming. It was tasteful. It was musical. I set the speakers to play classic mariachi music. Softly, respectfully. I waited for the reaction. Nothing. Janice came out to get her mail. She saw the 12-foot skeleton mariachi. She saw the guitar. She heard the trumpet solo drifting on the breeze. She didn't flinch. She grabbed her Pottery Barn catalog and walked back inside. "Come on!" I yelled at her closed door. "Give me something. Hate it. Love it. Acknowledge the guitar." The silence was deafening. Mother's Day was the turning point. Or at least I thought it would be. I had a crisis of conscience. I remembered the look on Janice's face after the meeting. The defeat. I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was the villain in her story. I was the chaos agent disrupting her carefully curated golden years. So I decided to extend an olive branch, a 12-foot olive branch. I spent 3 days making a sash. It was pink satin, trimmed with lace. I used iron-on letters to spell out, "World's #1 Mom." I draped it over Bonesy. I filled his hand, the one that had previously held a turkey waddle and a body bag, with a bouquet of giant plastic sunflowers. And then I did the unthinkable. I made a sign, a nice sign. I staked it into the ground at Bonesy's feet, facing her driveway. "Happy Mother's Day, Janice," from the neighborhood watch. It was sincere, mostly. Sunday morning arrived. The brunch crowd. The street was lined with cars as sons and daughters arrived to pay tribute to the matriarchs of the cul-de-sac. Janice's kids arrived. I saw her daughter, a woman who looked exactly like Janice but with better hair, get out of an SUV. She saw the skeleton. She saw the sash. She saw the sign. She stopped. She laughed. A genuine belly laugh. She pulled out her phone and took a picture. Then Janice came out. She saw the sign. She read her name. She looked at me. I was standing on my porch, holding a coffee, offering a tentative wave. "See?" I mouthed. "We can be friends." Janice stared at the sign. Her lip quivered. For a second, I thought she might smile. I thought the ice was finally melting. Then, she turned to her daughter and said, loud enough for me to hear, "He's mocking my role as a mother. He knows Bob and I are having problems." My jaw dropped. Bob? Problems? I looked at Bob, who was shuffling behind them carrying a potted orchid. He looked miserable. He looked like a man who wished he was a skeleton. "I'm not mocking you," I shouted, abandoning all pretense of cool. "It's a tribute. It's a nice sash." "Ignore him," Janice said, her voice like liquid nitrogen. "He's a sad, lonely man who plays with dolls." She ushered her family inside. Plays with dolls. That stung. It stung because it was technically true. I sat on my porch steps, defeated. The mariachi music felt inappropriate now, so I turned it off. Bonesy stood there, clutching his sunflowers, looking like a rejected suitor. "And we tried, buddy," I said. "We tried." May turned into June. The heat arrived early. This wasn't just summer heat. This was global warming, asphalt melting, air conditioner straining heat. The humidity in the mid-Atlantic is no joke. It turns the air into soup, and it turns high-density polyethylene into taffy. I noticed it on a Tuesday. I was coming home from a client meeting, sweating through my dress shirt. I pulled into the driveway and looked at Bonesy. He looked tired. His head was drooping forward. His chin was resting on his sternum. His arms, usually held high in a gesture of triumph or menace, were sagging at the elbows. "Heat fatigue," I muttered. I walked up to him and touched his tibia. The plastic was hot to the touch. Soft. Pliable. Oh no. Gravity was winning. The steel rebar Tony had put in the legs was holding the base steady, but the upper body, the hollow, plastic torso, was losing its structural integrity. By Thursday, it was a crisis. Bonesy was leaning dangerously forward. He looked like he was examining the grass for clover. If he leaned any further, he was going to snap at the waist and face-plant into the driveway. I couldn't let Janice see this. If she saw him failing, she would win. She would see that chaos is unsustainable, that entropy comes for us all. I called Tony. "Tony, we have a medical emergency." "Is it the skeleton again?" Tony asked. He sounded like he was eating a sandwich. "He's melting, Tony. He's got osteoporosis of the plastic. I need spinal fusion, stat. I'm on a job in Jersey. Can't make it until Saturday." "Saturday? He'll be a puddle by Saturday." "He's currently bowing to the mailman." "Prop him up with a 2x4, Dave. I'll be there Saturday." I hung up. A 2x4. How undignified. I went into the garage. I needed a splint. I needed an exoskeleton for the skeleton. I found a 10-foot length of PVC pipe. I painted it black. I wedged it under Bonesy's chin and staked it into the ground. It looked terrible. It looked like he was on crutches. That evening, I saw Janice. She was watering her lawn. She sprayed the water near the property line. She looked at Bonesy, propped up by his stick. She smiled. It was the first time I'd seen her smile in months. It was a shark's smile. Cold. Predatory. "Hot out," she called. I froze. She was speaking to me. "Very hot," I replied, wary. "Plastic doesn't do well in the heat," she observed, spraying her petunias. "Gets soft. Loses its shape." "He's just relaxing," I lied. "It's a casual pose, summer vibes." "He looks like he's dying," she said cheerfully. Again. "He's eternal, Janice," she laughed, a cruel, tinkling laugh. "We'll see." The race against the sun began. I spent the next 2 days in a panic. I bought umbrellas. I set up a misting fan aimed at his torso. I looked like a lunatic, cooling a plastic statue while my own lawn turned brown. Big Tony arrived on Saturday morning like the cavalry. He brought his welder. "We're going invasive," Tony said. "We got to open him up." We performed surgery right there on the lawn. Tony cut a hatch in Bonesy's back. We inserted a steel spine, a literal steel rod, welded to the base plate and running all the way up to the skull. We bolted the ribs to the steel. "Titanium reinforced," Tony grunted. Sparks flying as he welded. He could take a direct hit from a mortar round now. We sealed the hatch with epoxy. We painted over the scar. When we removed the PVC crutch, Bonesy stood tall. Straighter than ever. Rigid. Defiant. "That'll be 800, Tony said. "Hazard pay. It's 100 degrees out here." "Worth it." I waited for Janice to come out. When she finally did, expecting to see a pile of melted plastic, she found Bonesy standing at attention, chest out, chin up. I saw the confusion on her face. She looked at the ground, looking for the crutch. Gone. She looked at me. I was sitting in a lawn chair, sipping iced tea. "Good calcium intake?" I called out. She scowled and went inside, but the heat was just the warm-up. The real challenge of June was boredom. There are no holidays in June, not really. Flag Day, Father's Day. Father's Day was tricky. After the world's #1 mom debacle, I decided to leave Bob out of it. I didn't want to cause a divorce, so I focused on the block party. Every year, Oak Creek Estates has a summer solstice block party. Usually, it's held at the end of the cul-de-sac. Grills, coolers, kids running around with sparklers. This year, the HOA committee, of which Janice was the treasurer, obviously, sent out the flyer. Location, the cul-de-sac. Time, 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Note, please keep sidewalks clear of obstructions. Obstructions. I knew what that meant. They were going to set up the buffet tables right in front of my house. They were going to try to block the view of Bonesy with potato salad and coolers. I couldn't let that happen. I decided Bonesy needed to be part of the party. He needed to be useful. I went to the hardware store. I bought a hose attachment. I bought misters. I turned Bonesy into a water park. I ran a hose up his leg, through his torso, and out through his hands. I attached misting nozzles to his fingers. On the day of the block party, it was 95 degrees. The asphalt was radiating heat. The neighbors were setting up tables, sweating profusely. Janice was directing traffic, looking miserable in a beige linen suit. "Okay, the cooler goes here," she ordered, pointing to a spot directly in front of Bonesy's legs. "And the banner goes here. Let's try to minimize the visual impact of the structure." She meant the skeleton. I walked out. I was wearing swim trunks and a tank top. "Hey, everyone!" I shouted. "Who's hot?" The kids looked up. They were red-faced and sweaty. "Watch this." I walked over to the spigot and turned the handle. Hiss! A fine, cool mist erupted from Bonesy's outstretched hands. It created a 10-foot radius of refreshing fog. "Cool mist!" a kid screamed. The children swarmed. They ran into my yard, dancing under the skeleton's hands. "It feels so good." "Mom, come feel the skeleton." The parents drifted over. They stepped into the mist. "Oh, wow, that is nice." "Dave, this is genius," a dad named Mike said, holding a beer. "He's like a cabana boy." "He serves the people, Mike," I said, handing him a cold one from my own cooler. Janice stood alone by the potato salad. Her blockade had failed. Her obstruction was now the main attraction. She watched as the HOA president, Gary, walked over and stood under Bonesy's ribcage, letting the mist hit his face. "You know," Gary said, "I'm closing his eyes. We should allocate funds for this. It's a community utility." I looked at Janice. She was holding a spoon of potato salad. She dropped it. It landed on her shoe with a wet plop. I walked over to her. I felt generous. I felt like a god of weather. "Janice," I said, "you look warm. Come stand under the ribs. It's 10 degrees cooler." She looked at me with eyes that could have started a brush fire. "I would rather dehydrate," she hissed. "Suit yourself. But Bob is over there." I pointed. Bob was sitting in a lawn chair right under Bonesy's pelvis, a blissed-out expression on his face, letting the mist rain down on him. He looked happy. Janice let out a sound that was half growl, half sob, and marched over to drag her husband back to the beige zone. July was approaching. The big one. The finale. I had survived the winter. I had survived the wind. I had survived the heat and the HOA and the silent treatment. But I knew Janice wasn't done. She was quiet, but she wasn't broken. She was waiting for a slip-up. She was waiting for me to cross the line from eccentric to illegal. And I was about to give her the ammunition she needed. Because for the 4th of July, I didn't just want lights. I didn't just want sound. I wanted pyrotechnics. I wanted Bonesy to shoot fireworks. "You want to mount Roman candles to a plastic structure attached to your house?" Tony asked. He looked concerned. "Dave, I'm a contractor, not an arsonist." "It's patriotic, Tony. Think of the visual. Uncle Sam Bonesy firing freedom into the night sky." "Think of the fire code, Dave. You're gonna burn down the neighborhood. I'll use cold sparks, stage pyros. They're, the kind they use at concerts. Totally safe." Does Janice know? Janice thinks I'm done. She thinks the mist was the peak. She has no idea. I spent the last week of June sourcing sparkular machines, cold spark fountains that look like fireworks but are safe to touch. They were expensive. I dipped into my savings. This was the end game. I built the Uncle Sam costume, a top hat that was 3 feet tall, a blue tailcoat with tails that dragged on the ground, red and white striped pants. I rigged the spark machines to his hands. I wired them to a remote control. July 4th fell on a Tuesday. I took the day off. I spent the morning setting up. The atmosphere in the neighborhood was buzzing. People were grilling. Firecrackers were popping in the distance. Janice was hosting a BBQ. Of course she was. She had family over again. I saw them on her deck. They were eating corn on the cob. They were ignoring the giant Uncle Sam next door. They had learned to filter it out. That was the problem. They were getting used to him. He was becoming background noise. I couldn't let that happen. Art is meant to provoke. At 8 p.m., the sun began to set. The sky turned a bruised purple. I went out for a final check. The wiring was good. The spark machines were loaded. The audio cue was queued up. I saw a car pull up to Janice's house, a black sedan. Not a family car. A man got out. He was wearing a suit. On the 4th of July. He carried a briefcase. He walked up to Janice's door. She answered. She pointed at my house. She pointed at Bonesy. The man nodded, took notes, and walked over to my property line. My heart hammered. Who was this? City inspector, lawyer, hitman? He walked up the driveway. Mr. Dawson? That's me. I'm with the County Zoning Commission. We received a complaint about an unpermitted commercial structure on a residential lot. Commercial? I laughed nervously. It's not commercial. I'm not selling anything. The complaint alleges that you are operating a theme park attraction without a license, specifically a water feature and light show that draws crowds. He looked at Bonesy. Is that a spark machine? I swallowed. Maybe. Sir, if you detonate pyrotechnics from a temporary structure within 20 feet of a dwelling, you are in violation of Code 14B. I will have to issue a cease and desist order and a fine of $5,000. I stared at him. $5,000. I looked at Janice. She was on her deck, sipping white wine. She raised her glass, and she had played the long game. She had waited until I overextended. I haven't turned it on yet, I said. Don't, the inspector said. I'll be watching. If I see a single spark, I'm writing the ticket. He walked back to his car and sat there, waiting. I stood on the lawn. The sun was down. The neighborhood fireworks were starting. Boom, crackle. I had a remote in my pocket. I had the most spectacular display in suburban history ready to go, and I couldn't use it. I looked up at Uncle Sam Bonesy. He looked disappointed. I'm sorry, buddy, I whispered. She got us. I sat down on the porch steps, head in my hands. The defeat tasted like ash. Then, I heard a noise, a rustling in the bushes. Psst, Dave. I looked up. It was Bob. Janice's husband. He was crouching by the hedge holding a beer. He looked like a prisoner of war, exchanging secrets. Bob? She's in the bathroom, Bob whispered. Listen, the inspector, that's her cousin, Phil. He works for the zoning board in Ohio. He has no jurisdiction here. My eyes widened. What? It's a bluff, Dave. She flew him in. It's a psych out. You're kidding. She hates the skeleton, Bob said, taking a sip of beer. But I kind of like him. He makes me feel like anything's possible, even in this neighborhood. He looked at me. Light it up, Dave. Bob, if I do this, she'll kill you. She's already killing me slowly with kale salads and silence, Dave. Let me see the sparks. Bob slipped back through the hedge. I stood up. I looked at the black sedan. Cousin Phil, huh? I looked at Janice, who had returned to the deck. She looked smug. She thought she had won. I pulled the remote out of my pocket. Alexa, I said to the hidden speaker, play Born in the USA, Volume 11. The drum beat kicked in. Bam, 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 bam. Janice dropped her wine glass. Cousin Phil sat up in his car. I pointed the remote at the sky. For Bob, I whispered. I hit the button. I pushed the button. There is a specific kind of silence that happens right before a pyrotechnic charge fires. It's the silence of electricity finding its path. A millisecond where the universe holds its breath to see if you are about to do something cool or something that will require a skin graft. Then, it wasn't a bang. It was a roar. 2 pillars of silver fire erupted from Uncle Sam Bonesy's outstretched hands. They shot 20 feet into the humid night air, turning the darkness into blinding, glittering daylight. Unlike real fireworks, these were cold sparks, a mixture of titanium powder and physics that I don't fully understand but paid a lot of money to acquire. They didn't burn. They didn't smoke. They just glittered like diamonds being fed into a wood chipper. And the timing? The timing was impeccable. Springsteen hit the chorus, Born in the USA, just as the sparks reached their apex. The effect was mesmerizing. Bonesy looked like a rock god. The red and white striped pants were illuminated by the strobe light intensity of the sparks. The blue tailcoat flapped in the updraft created by the heat of the display. I heard the collective gasp of the neighborhood. The BBQ chatter stopped. The sparklers dropped. Then, the cheering started. It started from the Thompsons' yard 3 houses down. Then the Millers. Then the kids on the street. It was a roar of approval that rivaled the music. Yeah, go Bonesy! I stood on my porch, remote in hand, feeling like the conductor of a symphony of chaos. I looked at the black sedan. Cousin Phil was scrambling. He had rolled down his window to yell at me, but the sudden eruption of light had clearly terrified him. He was fumbling with his seatbelt, his eyes wide, reflecting the silver sparks. I walked down the driveway. I didn't run. I sauntered. The sparks were still firing, a 60-second burn time. I had plenty of time. I reached the driver's side window of the sedan just as Phil managed to get his car into gear. "Evening, Phil," I shouted over the music. He froze. He looked at me, then at the skeleton spewing fire, then back at me. I'm calling the police. This is a Class B hazard." I leaned in, resting my arm on his roof. "You know, Phil, I was just chatting with Bob. Nice guy, Bob. He mentioned you're visiting from Ohio." Phil's face went pale, paler than the sparks. "I didn't know Ohio zoning laws applied in Pennsylvania, Phil. That's a fascinating legal precedent. Is that new? Is that a Supreme Court thing?" Phil's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He looked up at Janice's deck. Janice was gone. She had fled the scene the moment the first spark flew. She knew. She knew I knew. I have jurisdiction, advisory jurisdiction," Phil stammered. "Phil," I said, my voice dropping to a menacing calm, "if you don't drive that rental car out of my cul-de-sac in the next 10 seconds, I'm going to call Officer Miller. And unlike you, Miller actually has a badge that works in this zip code. And he hates paperwork." Phil didn't wait for the countdown. He slammed on the gas. The sedan peeled out, tires screeching, doing a shameful 3-point turn in the middle of the street before rocketing away into the night. I turned back to the house, just as the sparks began to fade. They died down, leaving Bonesy standing tall in the sudden darkness, the afterimage searing my retinas. The music faded out. Silence returned to the street. Then, Bob stood up from behind the hedge. He raised his beer can high in the air. "God bless America," Bob said. And for the first time in history, the entire neighborhood applauded. The victory over Cousin Phil was absolute, but the war wasn't over. It had just entered a new, more dangerous phase, bureaucracy. Phil had been a bluff, but the fire department was real. They showed up 20 minutes later. Not because of a fire, but because 3 different neighbors, not Janice, surprisingly, but the terrified elderly couple 2 streets over, had called in reporting an explosion at the power plant. A massive fire truck, the kind with the ladder that extends to the moon, rolled up my street. Its lights were flashing, painting Bonesy in strobing red and white. I was ready. I had the spec sheet for the sparkular machines printed out. I had the receipt. I had a fire extinguisher sitting prominently on the porch. The fire marshal was a woman named Captain Halloway. She looked like she could bench press my car. She walked up the driveway, helmet under her arm, looking at the skeleton. "You the homeowner?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "You the one shooting fireworks off a plastic doll?" "They're cold sparks, Captain." "Granules of titanium alloy heated to—" "I know what they are," she interrupted, walking around Bonesy. She inspected the rigging. She checked the wires. She looked at the fire extinguisher. She turned to me. "You have a permit for a public display?" "It's a private residence, Captain." "You have more than 50 people watching," she said, gesturing to the street. The crowd hadn't dispersed. They were watching this interaction like it was the encore. "That classifies as a public gathering." My heart sank. This was it. The fine. The confiscation. Captain Halloway looked at the crowd. She looked at the kids with their faces pressed against the safety rail of the truck. She looked at Bonesy's Uncle Sam hat. "Is that a trash can?" she asked. "It is, modified." She cracked a smile. "My guys at the station have a bet going. They said it was a 55-gallon drum. I said it was a Rubbermaid." "Rubbermaid via Home Depot," I confirmed. "I win $20. She put her helmet back on. "Look, don't do it again without a permit. And next time, tell dispatch first so we don't roll the heavy rescue unit for a lawn ornament. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. Nice wiring, by the way. Very clean. She climbed back into the truck. The siren whooped once, a short, friendly blast, and they drove off. I looked at Janice's house. The blinds were shut tight. Not even a twitch. She was completely, totally beaten. And that's when the sadness hit. August is the Sunday of summer. It's hot, sticky, and full of the impending dread of autumn. The adrenaline of the 4th had worn off. Janice had gone into total radio silence. I didn't see her. I didn't see Bob. Their house looked abandoned, except for the landscapers who came every Tuesday to cut the grass to military precision. Bonesy stood in the yard, still wearing his Uncle Sam outfit. But the glamour was gone. The red stripes on his pants were fading in the UV index. The blue coat was full of pollen. I felt like a retired general sitting on a porch, looking at a battlefield where no one wanted to fight anymore. "What do we do now?" I asked Tony. Tony was back to perform a routine inspection on the steel spine. He was tightening a bolt on the L3 vertebra. "You enjoy the piece," Tony said. "You won. The enemy has retreated." "It's boring, Tony. It's so boring. I miss the notes. I miss the police visits. I miss the feeling of purpose." "Get a hobby," Tony suggested. "Build a deck. I can give you a quote." "This is my hobby." I looked at the calendar. August. No holidays. Nothing. Just heat and cicadas screaming in the trees. I needed a pivot. I needed something that wasn't aggressive. Something that proved I wasn't just a chaos agent, but a pillar of the community. "Back to school," I said. Tony stopped ratcheting. "You're gonna dress him like a school kid?" "I'm gonna dress him like a scholar." I spent the next week sourcing the props. I found a giant backpack, actually a trekking rucksack meant for Everest expeditions. I filled it with empty boxes to give it shape. I made a giant pencil out of a pool noodle and yellow duct tape. It was 6 feet long. I dressed Bonesy in a polo shirt, size XL, and khaki shorts. I gave him a propeller beanie. It was cute. It was wholesome. On August 20th, the first day of school, I unveiled Scholar Bonesy. He stood at the bus stop, which, conveniently, is right at the corner of my lot. At 7 a.m., the kids started gathering. They were sleepy, grumpy, and dreading the new year. Then they saw the skeleton. "Look at his pencil!" a first grader shouted. "He's got a propeller hat." The mood shifted. The kids started laughing. They took pictures. The bus driver pulled up, opened the door, saw the skeleton, and actually got out to take a selfie before loading the kids. I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching. It was a nice moment. Pure, uncomplicated. Then, the door to Janice's house opened. My stomach tightened. Was this it? The return of the Queen? Janice stepped out. She was wearing her bathrobe. She walked down her driveway to pick up the paper. She looked at the bus stop. She looked at the kids laughing around the skeleton. She paused. She didn't storm over. She didn't scowl. She just sighed. A long, weary sigh that I could hear from 30 feet away. And then she walked back inside. It was worse than anger. It was indifference. "She doesn't care anymore," I told the skeleton later that night. "We've become irrelevant." I realized then that a feud is a relationship. It takes two people to hold the rope. If one person lets go, the other one just falls on their ass. I had fallen on my ass. September arrived. The air got crisp. The leaves started to turn. We were approaching the 1-year anniversary. The full circle. I was taking down the back-to-school display. The giant pencil was starting to peel. The propeller beanie had blown away in a storm 2 weeks ago. I was on the ladder, unbuckling the backpack, when I heard a car door slam. I looked down. A minivan had pulled into Janice's driveway. A different car. Out of the back jumped 2 kids, a boy and a girl, maybe 7 and 9 years old. "Grandma!" they screamed, running toward the front door. Janice opened the door. She looked transformed. Her hair was done. She was smiling, a real smile, not the shark smile. She hugged the kids. Then, the boy pointed at my yard. "Whoa, Grandma, look, it's the skeleton." My heart stopped. Janice froze. She slowly turned her head to look at Bonesy. The boy ran to the property line. "He's huge, is he real?" He's plastic, Timmy, Janice said, her voice tight. Can we go see him, please? Janice hesitated. She looked at the skeleton. She looked at me perched on the ladder like a gargoyle in flannel. He belongs to the neighbor, Janice said. Please, Grandma, he's so cool, the girl added. I held my breath. This was the moment, the tipping point. Janice looked at her grandkids. She looked at their faces, lit up with that specific kind of wonder that only giant, stupid things can produce. She looked back at me, and for the first time in a year, her eyes weren't full of hate. They were full of resignation, and maybe, just maybe, a tiny bit of gratitude. Go ahead, she said softly, but don't touch the structure. It's art. Art. She called it art. I almost fell off the ladder. The kids ran over. They circled Bonesy. They asked me questions. How tall is he? 12 feet, I said, climbing down. Does he eat people? Only zoning inspectors, I whispered. Janice watched from her porch. She didn't come over, but she didn't go inside. She stood there, arms crossed, watching her grandkids laugh. That night I didn't turn on the spotlight. I let Bonesy stand in the moonlight, a silent guardian. I realized the war was over, and nobody had won. Or maybe we both had. But peace is fragile. And I knew that to truly seal the treaty, to truly end the Cold War of Maple Drive, I needed to make a gesture. A grand gesture. I looked at the calendar. October was coming. Halloween, the anniversary of the letter. I had a choice. I could go bigger. I could buy a second skeleton. I could build a mausoleum. I could make Janice's life a living hell for another year. Or I could pivot. I went to my computer. I opened a new browser tab. I searched for 6-foot animatronic werewolf. I searched for how to bake a casserole. I smiled. Operation Olive Branch, I said to the empty room. Commence. The next few weeks were a covert operation. I bought the werewolf. It was expensive. It had glowing yellow eyes, and it howled at the moon when motion activated. It was hideous. It was perfect. I kept it in the garage, hidden under a tarp. I also spent a suspicious amount of time on allrecipes.com. Do you know how hard it is to make a casserole that doesn't taste like salty sludge? It's harder than wiring a skeleton. I practiced. I made 3 lasagnas. I made a tuna noodle surprise that was, frankly, a surprise to no one but my toilet. Finally, I settled on a classic. Shepherd's pie. Comfort food. Unassuming, hearty. October 1st, the anniversary. I woke up early. I baked the pie. I put on a clean shirt. I loaded the werewolf into a wagon. I balanced the hot casserole dish on top of the box. I walked down my driveway. It was a Saturday. Janice was outside, sweeping her porch. She always swept her porch on Saturdays. She saw me coming. She stopped sweeping. She gripped the broom. The muscle memory of conflict was still there. I pulled the wagon up to the property line. Morning, Janice, I said. She eyed the wagon. She eyed the box. She eyed the foil-covered dish. Dave, she said, what is this? Another prop? Are you invading? No invasion, I said. A surrender. I picked up the casserole. Shepherd's pie. Homemade, not poisoned, I promise. I ate a spoonful to check. She looked at the dish. She looked at me. Why? Because, I said, gesturing to the box in the wagon. I heard Timmy, your grandson, say he liked wolves when he was here. Janice stiffened. He loves wolves. He's obsessed. Well, I said, I found this guy. He's a 6-footer, animated. Howls. Pretty scary. I patted the box. I don't have room for him, I lied. My yard is crowded. I was wondering if you wanted him for the grandkids when they visit this month. Janice stared at the box. She stared at the casserole. Her brain was trying to process the data. Enemy offering gifts. Trojan horse scenario. You want me to put a monster in my yard? Not a monster, Janice. A guardian. A watchdog. To keep the squirrels away from your hydrangeas. She looked at the box again. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. He howls? She asked. Only when people walk by. It's got a volume knob. You can turn it down. She looked at her immaculate lawn. She looked at the spot where the garden gnome stood. Timmy comes next weekend, she murmured. He'd flip, I said. She put the broom down. She took a step forward. Is there garlic in the shepherd's pie? she asked. Bob has reflux. 0 garlic, all herbs. She reached out and took the casserole dish. It was heavy. It was warm. Thank you, Dave, she said. And this time there was no shark in the smile. Just a tired, grandmotherly warmth. I can help you set him up, I offered. If you want. She looked at the box. Is it hard? The wiring? I'll call Tony, I said. He'll do it for free. He owes me. Big Tony arrived at 9 a.m. on Sunday. He pulled his truck up to the curb, got out, and looked at my yard, then at Janice's yard. He took off his sunglasses. Okay, Tony said, pointing a thick finger. Just so I understand the scope of work, you want me to take a 6-foot animatronic wolf out of your garage and bolt it into her azalea bed? That is correct, I said. The same woman who called the police on a turkey waddle? People change, Tony. Growth is possible. Tony looked at Janice, who was standing on her porch holding a cup of tea. She gave a small, awkward wave. Tony looked back at me. This is a trap, he whispered. She's gonna sue me for emotional distress caused by a werewolf. It's a gift, Tony, just get the drill. The installation of Wolfie, Janice named him, not me, was the most surreal hour of my life. Usually when I install a prop, it involves me swearing at instructions in the dark. This time it was a committee meeting. Janice stood over us, pointing at the soil. Not there, she directed. That's a bulbs area. Tulips come up there in April. Move him to the left, near the boxwood. He needs clearance for the arm swing, Janice, I explained, holding the werewolf's furry arm. If we put him too close to the boxwood, he's going to punch your shrubbery every time he howls. Well, I don't want him punching the shrubbery. Can we angle him? We can angle him, Tony grunted, sweating as he dug a post hole in Janice's pristine mulch. We can angle him toward the street. Maximum scare factor. Not too scary, Janice cautioned. Timmy is 7. I want spooky fun, not lifelong therapy. Spooky fun, got it? We bolted the wolf down. We ran the extension cord. I showed Janice how to use the footpad trigger. Okay, I said, wiping dirt off my hands. Give it a try. Janice stepped on the pad. The werewolf lunged forward. Its yellow eyes flashed. It threw its head back and let out a howl that sounded like a mix between a coyote and a broken vacuum cleaner. "Hurrah!" Janice jumped back. She put a hand to her chest. Then she giggled. It wasn't a shark laugh. It was a genuine schoolgirl giggle. Oh my, she said. It is rather vigorous, isn't it? It's got torque, Tony agreed, packing up his tools. Don't let the cat get near the gears. Bob came out of the house. He looked at the wolf. He looked at Janice. He looked at me. Is that ours? Bob asked. It's for the grandkids, Bob, Janice said, straightening her cardigan. It's festive. Bob smiled. It was the smile of a man who had just seen a prison wall collapse. It's beautiful, he said. I'm going to name him Phil, after your cousin. I snorted. Janice actually smirked. The truce was sealed. Halloween night was the test. Usually Janice turns her porch light off. She sits in the back of the house with the lights out, pretending to be in Florida. This year, her porch light was on. She had a bowl of candy. Not the good stuff. It was those weird strawberry candies wrapped in plastic that looked like they were manufactured in 1952, but it was candy. I sat on my porch, handing out full-sized Snickers, because I have a reputation to uphold. Bonesy was wearing his classic spooky look. Black cloak, scythe, fog machine. But the real action was next door. Timmy and his sister were there, dressed as Spider-Man and Elsa. They were manning the werewolf. Every time a trick-or-treater walked up the driveway, Timmy would stomp on the footpad. "Hurrah!" The trick-or-treaters screamed. Then they laughed. "Did you see the wolf?" a kid yelled, running over to my yard. "Mrs. Higgins has a werewolf." "I saw," I said, handing him a Snickers. "Pretty cool, huh?" "She's cool," the kid said. I looked over at Janice. She was sitting in a lawn chair wrapped in a blanket, watching Timmy scare the living daylights out of a toddler dressed as a pumpkin. She caught my eye. She raised her bowl of strawberry candies in a toast. I raised my Snickers. We had done it. We had gentrified the Halloween spirit. But if you think the story ends with a werewolf, you don't understand the nature of suburban escalation. You don't understand that once you open the door to lawn maximalism, you can't close it. November passed quietly. We respected the turkey. Bonesy wore his pilgrim hat. Wolfie was put back in the box. Timmy cried, but Janice promised he'd be back. Then came December. I was in my driveway, untangling a ball of lights that was mathematically impossible to untangle, when Janice walked over. She was holding a clipboard. "Dave," she said. "Janice." "I've been thinking," she said, tapping the clipboard with a pen, "about the Christmas display." "Oh?" I looked up, wary. "Am I too loud again? I haven't even put the speakers out." "No," she said. "I've been thinking about synergy." "Synergy?" "Bob and I were looking at the roof lines," she continued, pointing to the space between our houses. "And we realized that if we anchor a cable from your chimney to our chimney, we could suspend a flying sleigh illusion." I dropped the lights. "Excuse me?" "A zip line," Janice clarified. "We can have Santa, your skeleton, obviously, in a sleigh, suspended between the properties. Maybe some reindeer." I stared at her. "Janice, are you suggesting we physically connect our houses with a high-tensile steel cable to support a flying skeleton?" "It would double the visual impact," she said, looking at her notes. "And it would completely block the view of the Miller's house across the street. I hate their inflatable snowman. It looks deflated half the time." I stood up slowly. A grin spread across my face. "Janice," I said, "you're a mad genius." "I have a vision, Dave. If we're going to do this, we do it right. I want to win the county light fight." "There's a contest?" "There is. Grand prize is a plaque and $500. "I don't care about the money," I said. "I want the plaque." "Me too." And so, the Great Christmas Alliance began. It was no longer me against Janice. It was us against them. We worked for 3 weeks. Big Tony was practically living in our driveways. We rented a lift. We built the sleigh. It was plywood, painted candy apple red with gold trim. We put Bonesy in the driver's seat, wearing his Santa suit, freshly dry cleaned. We ran the cable. It was a thick steel line anchored into the brick of my chimney and Janice's chimney. We hoisted the sleigh. It hung 20 feet in the air, right over the property line. It looked like Santa was swooping in for a landing, but we didn't stop there. Janice, it turned out, had a hidden talent for lighting. She understood color theory. While I was the build-a-giant structure guy, she was the wrap every individual twig in LED lights gal. She wrapped her trees. She wrapped my trees. She wrapped the mailbox. She wrapped the cable holding the sleigh. We synced the controllers. One massive, pulsating, synchronized light show spanning 2 lots. On December 15th, the night of the judging, we stood in the street. The entire neighborhood was there. The Millers were there, looking at their sad, half-deflated snowman with shame. Cousin Phil, who wasn't actually there, but I liked to imagine him watching via satellite, would have had a stroke. "Ready?" I asked Janice. She was holding the remote. "Ready." "Hit it?" She pressed the button. Boom! 20,000 lights ignited simultaneously. The sleigh glowed. The trees shimmered. The music, Trans-Siberian Orchestra obviously, kicked in. Guitar riff. Bonesy sat high above us, the king of Christmas, looking down on his domain with glowing green eyes. The crowd gasped. Then they cheered. The judges, a group of 3 people with clipboards, just stopped writing and stared. I looked at Janice. Her face was illuminated by the flashing red and green lights. She looked happy. She looked alive. Bob put his arm around her. "We crushed it," Bob said. "We certainly did," Janice agreed. She looked at me. "Dave?" "Yeah, Janice?" "For Valentine's Day, so I was thinking." "Oh, God." "Cupid," she said, her eyes gleaming with a manic light. "But he needs a target. Maybe we build a giant heart on my roof and he shoots a laser?" I laughed. I laughed until my sides hurt. "A laser," I repeated. "Janice, that requires FAA clearance." "So, you know a guy, don't you?" "I might know a guy." I looked up at the sleigh. I looked at the cable connecting our homes. It was a literal bridge. A bridge built of pettiness, escalated into art, and solidified into friendship. I realized then that the suburbs aren't boring. They're a canvas. You just have to be willing to annoy a few people to paint on it. The music swelled to a crescendo. The lights flashed in a blinding strobe finale. "You know," I said, leaning over to Janice as the song ended, "this is going to jack up your electric bill." Janice shrugged, watching the applause. "War is hell, Dave," she said, quoting me back to myself with a wink. "But at least the property values held steady."